connect.
I think you're in here as a panelist, right?
Yeah, but the phone number didn't give me that. I'll try it again.
Yay.
We can hear you.
Okay. I don't have the best backdrop right now. I'm in the basement.
But the lights are really pretty.
I'm like, what can I say? I have a flag. Can I get a picture of that and put it in the background or no?
I think it's
Cindy
fine.
looks perplexed.
Keep it real.
You're fine. You're fine.
Crazy, dirty basement.
Where are you?
In our basement. It's cooler down here than the trailer. Trailer's hot right now.
Your city government
Yep.
in action.
Jeff will be joining us in just a moment. Mayor Ellsworth.
Okay. This is the idle chit chat that we normally have before meetings, except for nobody's chit chatting but me.
Yay.
I didn't mean to FaceTime.
Thank you, everybody. I had a little trouble checking in. Can you hear me?
The Zoom is not working?
Okay, very good. Okay. Now I'm going to...
Hold on.
Okay, hang on. I'm just trying to locate my items here.
Mayor Ellsworth, if you could give me 2 minutes.
Certainly. Certainly.
Somehow we gotta turn off that sound. How can we, where is that sound coming from? Well, I gotta be able to talk, but it's off over here. So it's off there, but it's on here.
That helps. Test, test. Test, test, test. Hold on 1 second. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. We're having some technical. Just 1 second. Amalia, can you? Oh.
Yes, I'm sending it to you right now,
Once I receive the new link, I'm gonna swap it out on the agenda so the public can try again and be able to get in.
N-29-20 and guidance from the California Department of Public Health on gatherings. Remote public participation is allowed. We will address the order in the following ways. Members of the public may not physically attend meetings. The city council meeting will be live streamed on Comcast Channel 28 and on the city's website, barring technical difficulties. Those members of the public wishing to participate must do so remotely via Zoom electronic meetings in the following ways: by either logging onto the Zoom link located on the meeting agenda. Please download the app to your computer or mobile device and enter the meeting ID, or by calling a listed number and enter the meeting ID. Public comment for city council meetings will be accepted via email to publiccomment@cityofsthelena.org. And Amalia, our recreation supervisor, will highlight how public participation will be received.
Public participation can be received by when Mayor Ellsworth opens public comment. If you have called in, you can press *9, and that will put you in a queue, and then you will be notified when you are allowed to speak. That if you are using the Zoom app and you are watching the meeting, you can click the raise hand button, which will be in the bottom left corner. And that will allow also you to come in the queue for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. For this portion, I suggest everybody put their microphones on mute. You may remain seated and follow after me. Place your hands on your heart and we will begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we'll move to our roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Here.
Councilmember Knudsen.
I'm here.
Chateau.
Here.
Koberstein.
Here.
Very good. Thank you. And as we get into the meeting, we'll have some updates on the COVID-19 situation. But at this point, we're going to call for public forum. This is where members of the public are entitled to speak on matters of municipal concern that are not on tonight's agenda. Each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes, please. Is there any public comment? Are we seeing any at this point?
We do have 3 members of the public participating, but we do not have any comment at this time.
Okay, very well. Thank you. With that, I will close public comment, and then I'll move on to reports by staff and city council, future agenda items, and AB 1234 reports. I'm going to call on city staff for updates. First, our city attorney, is there any closed session report out?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's my understanding that there is not a report out of closed session.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move to our city manager.
No reports tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Very good. Our finance director, Ms. Mitz.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Just a reminder to everybody that this Thursday, May 28th, we are having our second budget workshop, and that will be from 9 till noon. And the information is available on the city's website as well as the appropriate links.
Thank you very much.
Too bad.
Our city clerk.
Nothing to report.
Do we have a report from Public Works?
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Very well. Planning and Building.
I don't have a show.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing to report.
Police and Fire.
Which one?
Police have nothing to report.
Very good. Our council members, Councilmember Knudsen.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Chateau.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Koberstein.
Nothing to report.
And Vice Mayor Doring.
I can't mute the actual.
We're making up for the 18-minute delay with no reports, which is most appreciated. No, nothing to report.
Thank you. Well, I'll be very brief. I want to continue to thank our community, residents, businesses, everybody for calmly sticking together as we move into our recovery phases. The practice of courtesy, caution, common sense, and kindness goes a long way in these times where we're getting information. It's not all coming in at once. So everybody being patient with each other as we get into these recovery phases, which the city will be putting out information this week as we get more information. We meet continuously through each week with the other mayors, with representatives from the county, state, and federal, these representatives that we have to get information, making sure that we're moving consistently with everybody else. I want to continue to let folks know that they can get more information about assistance at readynapacounty.org. They can go to, if they need to talk about assistance, also they can go to the Napa Valley Community Foundation to find out about how to get assistance or to donate towards that assistance. Our local Chamber of Commerce has been remarkable in helping our businesses find ways to navigate forward. So I want to continue to urge folks to make contact with the Chamber if there's a business that has questions or challenges, to contact the Chamber or the city, and let's all keep working together. One thing I don't want to forget as we move into this hot, dry season is we're moving into fire season, regardless of the COVID situation. And so we want to be thinking and be mindful of what we do in terms of home hardening, making our landscape and homes as fireproof as possible, our go bags, our plan, our commuting with the community, our communication with the community, with our neighborhoods on our plans. If fire should be a problem. So I just want to remind folks that that conversation is getting started, and we want to be engaged in that as well as we move into the recovery phases of the COVID situation. So thank you, everybody, for continuing moving forward. And after that, we will now move to our staff briefing, and we'll start with item 7.1. This is an update on our wastewater treatment plant by our Public Works Director.
Thank you. I want to report out that we received 6 requests for proposals from consultants last week. We're narrowing down the selection this week between the consultant and city staff, and hope to have a selection picked by the end of this week, and either interviewing with the top 2 candidates, or if there's at least one that's singled out, the interview with them, and hopefully have a selection in time for the June 23rd council meeting. The consultant for the design is also still working on the RFP for the package plant portion of the project. So they're actively working on both of those items.
Thank you. Any thoughts or comments on that section? We will move on to item 7.2. This is the Upper York Creek Dam project update, also by our Public Works Director.
Yes, the big update was last Friday. We received comments from the County of Napa with regard to the grading permit application. This is for the 7 disposals that were supposed to go on Spring Mountain property, Spring Mountain Vineyard. And they had requested additional studies that would take too long to do, and more money on the city's part to conduct, that would delay the project. So we decided to stop any further grading permit proposals with Spring Mountain Vineyard in the County of Napa, and we're going to be taking all these sediment disposals and dam disposals over to Clover Flat landfill in Calistoga. Both were identified as sites for taking the disposal. And other good news, we also received a lower asbestos. There was concerns of asbestos in the soil, and they were almost non-detect, which will help lower the cost for taking the disposals to the landfill. So all that information was included in the 5th and final addendum for the bid project on Friday evening. The bid opening is this Thursday. We still have an active audience of at least 5 pre-qualified contractors, so we're hoping for very competitive bids on Thursday. We received a word of a draft conditions from the Regional Water Quality Control Board for their permit. As you are aware, I signed a draft agreement with the California Fish and Wildlife 2 weeks ago, and we're following up with the Army Corps this week on the Section 106, which is the cultural consultation with the federal, which is the SHPO, the cultural. And so hopefully we'll have everything buttoned up and permits, and we can award this project at the end of June.
Thank you. Thank you. Any comments at this point? Mr. Doring?
Will there be, with respect to the soil removal, will there be an increased cost due to hauling to the Clover Flat?
We anticipated that.
If so, what is it?
So we won't know yet. We actually had a contractor during one of the site visits to Spring Mountain Vineyard say it'll be actually cheaper to haul to Clover Flat. So we won't know until Thursday the actual estimate for hauling. The route to Spring Mountain Vineyards is a remote access route. Even though it's an active vineyard, it was a narrow road and steep road to their site. So I had concerns of the truck, even though we utilized it in the early 2000s with the first 7 off haul. When you hear a contractor saying it'll be cheaper to take it to the Clover Flat, I'm anticipating that it will be cheaper. And there's also the help that the fuel prices are low right now. So hoping for the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for the report. I'm very happy to see both these items moving forward. Thank you. So now we will move to our consent calendar. My understanding is that 8.5 will be pulled. I'm going to read through the numbers. If there's any other number that somebody would want to pull, they can let me know, and they may, the public watching can also call for one of these to be pulled. So I'll read through 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, and we are pulling 8.5. So with that, with the exception of 8.5, I will entertain a motion to pass the consent items on one vote.
I'd move approval of items 8.1 to 8.4, with 8.1 being as amended.
Thank you.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Chateau?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. And so, Mr. Prestwich, you are going to touch on 8.5?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add a punctuation point to this particular item. This is a draft resolution prepared by the National League of Cities, customized a little bit for our needs. And essentially, it's advocating for some form of fiscal relief to assist local governments in addressing the impacts, the financial impacts from the COVID-19 virus and pandemic. We've projected a $5.8 million budget deficit next year. That's a very large number in the context of our budget. And in the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 opportunities to weigh in on legislation. One was a federal bill, the HEROES Act, which would have, it's still in discussions and fair to say negotiations between the houses in Washington. And there may be some opportunity for some fiscal relief through that bill. Secondly, at the state level, we learned late Friday night of some potential impacts related to our vehicle license fee revenue. And so that's another good example of the fact that we're in an environment that's changing very quickly. And this resolution authorizes the mayor to draft letters on behalf of the city council related to COVID-19 revenue impacts at both the state and federal level. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Any thoughts from the council? Questions? Okay, so if folks are comfortable with that, and we want to have a motion, unless there's any further comment.
I move that we approve 8.5 on the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Mayor,
Yes,
Mayor,
Prestwich?
you also want to ask if there is any public comment on that
Okay,
item.
sorry, yeah. So is there any public comment on this, Ms. Kosecki?
At this time, there is no public comment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I will bring it back now to the council, and we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I seconded.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Koberstein,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Okay. Now we'll move on to item 9.1 under public hearings. This is discussion of potential activity and project for inclusion in the 2020 Community Development Block Grant, CDBG application, in consideration of approval of a resolution approving application for economic development business assistance funding to provide working capital to small businesses for retention of jobs in an amount not to exceed $750,000. And 2, the execution of a grant agreement and any amendments thereto from the 2019 to 2020 funding year of the CDBG program. And this will be Ms. Mitz, our finance director.
Great, thank you. So this item does seek approval of potential activity and projects for inclusion in the 2020 CDBG application program. Currently, over the past couple council meetings, we've brought several projects forward, and then we continually look at the CDBG grant guidelines to see if there's anything else that the city can potentially apply for. So currently we have 4 that City Council has approved for us to look to move forward with applications. The first is the purchase of a multifamily housing, and that's in conjunction with our town, St. Helena. The second was a public improvement project, specifically Cornella Pump Station upgrades. However, since the time that City Council had approved us to move forward with the application, we did determine that we are not eligible for it under the CDBG grant guidelines. The third is the ongoing housing rehabilitation program that we do with the Napa County or Napa Housing Authority. And then the fourth one that we currently have underway is a over-the-counter permit for the Hunts Grove parking lot project, which we are currently working on the application. So in continuing to research what other CDBG funding opportunities there are, we did discover, based on the designated criteria, that the city does have the ability to apply for additional CDBG funds under their economic development business assistance. And this is for a maximum grant amount of $750,000. Initially, this grant application would have been due on June 1st, and it was going to be a competitive grant. However, they have extended the application deadline to September 15th, and it is now going to be an over-the-counter permit, or over-the-counter application. And so this is something that, although they have extended it, we are looking to try to get the application in as soon as possible. So with the approval of the resolution, it does authorize the city to complete the grant application for funding, as well as allows the city manager to execute the grant agreement if it's awarded. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and we are seeking approval of the resolution tonight.
Thank you. Are there any initial thoughts or questions from the council? Mr. Doring?
Thank you. With respect to the business assistance grant, is the city precluded from spending money or incurring costs right now before they actually get the grant? Or do they have to wait for the grant and then incur the costs?
That is something that we are not sure about, but we can reach out to CDBG tomorrow.
Thank you.
Ms. Chateau?
I had a question on how does the grant work? When you apply as a small business, is the loan secured? Is it just money that you get if you qualify? Do you have any of the specifics on that?
We don't have specifics on that particular portion of it. What it is a loan at this point. but we don't know if it is going to require any type of guarantee or security. There is a chance that CDBG might turn it into a forgivable loan at a later time. The finance manager, Mandy Kellogg, and I had a great conversation with one of the representatives up in Ukiah who deals with these particular type of grant programs day in and day out. And so he was very helpful in helping us try to guide and formulate, because before we can even submit the grant application, we actually have to put a program together. And so that's something that we're vigorously trying to work on. So it's something that we will ask the question. As of right now, it's a loan. We don't know if eventually it would be forgivable or not. The one nice thing about the CDBG funds, they work similar to how redevelopment worked in the past, that when people pay back the loan to the city, then what we do is we redeploy that same money for other type of business development or business help with the businesses later. So it ends up being a rolling fund that we can use at later time when it is paid back.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Any other, Ms. Koverstein?
Is this over the counter or is this a competitive application?
They just modified it I believe it was early last week, to become an over the counter as opposed to competitive. Initially, it was a competitive with the deadline, the due date being June 1st. However, they've extended the deadline to September 15th, and it's over the counter.
And so to kind of follow up on Paul's question, in addition to getting more details tomorrow about when the money might be forthcoming, when would we actually know if we were successful in being funded?
That is another question I can ask them tomorrow. Typically, it's the sooner we apply, the sooner that we can get the funding. What CDBG is doing right now for their process for us getting information from them, they will actually not answer phone calls. You submit all your questions to them in writing, and they have the quote unquote office hours where you listen in during their office hours, and they will actually respond to the questions as well as send out a mass email to everybody who's in the CDBG program. So it is something that we will definitely ask the question probably tonight and hopefully have an answer fairly quickly. They are pretty good about responding within 24 hours.
Okay, I have one more question in case you're able to ask them questions tomorrow. What do they consider small local business?
I will have to ask them what they consider small local business. Their qualifier is that for every $35,000 that's loaned out, it has to save at least one job. And so we know, as far as meeting the criteria, the 3 national objectives of CDBG, we should be able to prove that pretty easily, especially with anybody in our downtown business where you might have servers, you might have tasting room personnel, but for every $35,000 that we give to them, they would have to prove that it actually saved one job.
Any additional council question or comment before I open it to the public? Seeing none, I will open it to the public comment. Are we seeing any public comment at this point?
This time we do not have any public comment.
Very good, thank you. So I'll bring it back to the council now. And so we've looked at these items that we think that this would be appropriate for, and you're simply at this point looking for the direction to go forward and looking for a motion regarding that. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. In order for the city to be able to submit an application, we do have to have a resolution from the city council approving and authorizing us to submit the application. And I do want to make one other point of clarification. I got a quick message that it's actually 3 days for them to get back to us, not 24 hours. My apologies.
Okay, so we could know by the end of the week in terms of a time frame when this funding might be available.
Correct.
Okay, very good. With that, is there a motion on this item?
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
And a roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Doreen,
Yes.
Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Knudsen,
Yes.
Hilberstein, Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Okay. So with that item, we will move to our next item, which is 10.1. This is under old business. This is city manager update on COVID-19 emergency, discussion and direction regarding anticipated reopening of city amenities and associated protocols. This is from Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. If this item looks familiar, that's because it is. We had the same item on our prior council meeting, and I anticipate the same one recurring in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the potential reopening of parks that the council authorized that evening. And as you recall, staff had worked on some safety protocols that were included in the reopening process. And as you know, the pandemic and the stages of reopening are quite fluid. Activities that were considered potentially stage 3 are now transitioning into stage 2. Some of the business types have probably, fair to say, hovered between stage 2 and stage 3. And so today we learned that hair appointments are now permissible. And that's an example of an activity that was previously considered for stage 3 that now is moved up into stage 2. So while this entire reopening remains fluid, we are continuing our planning with respect to the reopening of city facilities. And tonight I'd like to talk to you about the library in particular. In 2 weeks, I anticipate talking to you more about City Hall protocols. So with respect to the library reopening, we attached an item this afternoon that's described as a 3-phase, it's a draft, 3-phase reopening process for the library. And if you recall, when we were transitioning into a shelter at home process, for about 3 days, maybe 48 to 72 hours, we had a form of curbside pickup that was a process where the members of the public would come to the front door, contact staff by telephone or email in advance, reserve several books, and we would make those available to them on a case-by-case basis. And at that time, we also discontinued receiving books into the library. The point of that was to limit the contact and the potential spread and transmission of the virus. And now that we're in the process of reopening, in partnership with other libraries and communication with our local public health office, as well as state officials and contacts with their libraries, we know that other libraries are beginning to reopen, and reopening today is defined more as a curbside type of process. And that's what we anticipate, a process that would initially begin with curbside pickup and a form of delivery of materials to homes. And so we've sketched out our staff has sketched out, and I want to thank our library staff for putting this together. Because we're still using a number of our library staff, the full-time staff for our emergency operations center, the reopening plan would consist of a couple of full-time staff, as well as just 1.5, I believe, along with our part-time staff. And that would support the curbside pickup delivery option, while some of the other library staff continue to work on emergency functions. And so our staff has put together an outline of a phased opening. And what we anticipate is we don't have dates in mind in terms of when these stages would hit certain dates. We do believe that it's appropriate to transition to this phase 1, no contact, curbside and delivery stage, with the building still closed to the public, the pickup occurring in the parking lot. We do believe it would be appropriate to consider a date from next Monday and forward. That would allow our staff time to get the library organized. We do know that we anticipate receiving a lot of books that will go into a quarantine for 72 hours as part of this process, and we'll continue that process for of quarantining books for the foreseeable future. And I think when we look at some of the phases of reopening at the state level, it's fair to say those are some of the stages that may guide the implementation of additional reopening phases within the library plan. Also, the availability of staffing as we potentially begin to pull down on the activities on the EOC side and transition back to some of our other operations. So our librarian is available this evening to answer any specific questions you have about the thinking and the draft that is before you this afternoon that we've presented to you this evening. And we're happy to answer questions that you have with respect to the library.
Thank you. Are there any initial questions from council or thoughts from council on this issue? Okay, I'm looking and.
Ms. Chateau has the comment.
Oh, okay. And then we'll move to Mr. Knudsen. Ms. Chateau?
I do. I just have a clarifying question. When you say that how are you determining how the library will move to the next stages? I heard you saying the state guidelines and also based on staffing.
Right. So what I'm thinking, and this is very fluid, is that when the state begins to transition to a form of stage 3, which is a higher, when the state is comfortable reopening higher risk businesses, that's a nod to the idea that at the local level, we should also feel more comfortable with reopening higher risk, higher touch businesses, but with established protocols in place. So our staff has been thinking about how to rearrange the tables. I think if we ask Chris to, on the spot with respect to how many people might be allowed into the building with a stage 2A that's described, it may be as few as 3 people in the computer area to limit the amount of, from a spacing standpoint, to ensure that there's a 6-foot distance between patrons. And so we do have we have several library staff that have been transitioned to EOC, Emergency Operations Center activities. So Mariah, for example, is part of our public information team, and there's still a lot of active communication that's occurring 7 days a week. And you saw some of the communications occur over the weekend with emails from our PIO team. So we still need to support the PIO team with the enhanced staffing in that function of that particular section of the EOC. But I think as we transition into stage 3 and eventually into stage 4, those are about the periods of time where we would bring back to you to make sure that the council has a comfort level with the phased reopening. But this is a sketch of what we're anticipating, and we're looking for any feedback that you have for us tonight, with particularly related to phase 1 and any other particular phases that we foresee down the road. I hope that's helpful.
It is. I'm trying to get my mind around what do we do in terms of people using the library in the summer for somewhere cool to go, and just how that works in the new world. I noticed in there, the bathrooms won't be accessible for further along in the phasing. And I was curious, why is that different from a park bathroom when we're able to use that now? But I think that those are more specifics to work out later.
Thank you. Mr. Knudsen?
My question's covered. Thank you.
Any other council comment here before I open it to the public? Seeing none, I will open the public comment. Wondering if we have any takers on public comment on this item.
At this time, we do not have any public comment.
Thank you. So to me, it looks like we're moving along as we are with so many aspects of bringing things back a bit at a time. I think it's all very measured. I think we're continuing to monitor the numbers and the curve as we go. I know the County Health Department of Health is doing this. So as we see reopening with businesses and we start looking at our city amenities, it appears to me that we have a good plan moving forward. I think the concept that the library also serves as a cooling center for the community is important to consider. And if that's not going to work, what what might work, and also as a computer center for the community, for those who may not be able to or may not have their own. So I do think as we move forward, those considerations are important, but this looks like a step in the right direction. Do we, Mr. Presswich?
Mayor, I want to invite our librarian, Chris Creedon, if she would like to offer any additional context and touch on areas that I may have generalized too much on.
Very good.
Provide a little bit of background on some of the thinking behind the phased reopening, some of the conversations she's had with fellow librarians.
Thank you. Ms. Creedon?
Hi. I just wanted to say that the limited entry one was put into 2 phases or 2 parts because we are worried about people not having access to computers, but we don't want having access to public computers because that is a difficulty in St. Helena. It's something that staff, we still need to work on how to make it safe. And so, you know, do we need plexiglass around the stations? I think at that point it would be probably at most 3 people. So it's something that we can control with appointments. Phase 2B with the limited access is maybe capping it at 10. And at that point, it's already people browsing in the library, which right now staff isn't comfortable with. So I'm trying to balance both of those with this plan. And I have been wondering about the cooling center, especially since it's getting hot this week. So that's something that staff and I need to work on. That's a real worry because that's people lounging inside, reading magazines, sharing content and books. And how do we quarantine it or separate it if they're looking at it in the library? So that's kind of part of a bigger conversation that libraries haven't really had yet and are still grasping and trying to figure out. But the state library is working on guidelines for stage 3 with the governor. So they are working and trying to figure this out, and things are constantly changing. So, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try answering them.
Thank you. Any specific questions, Mr. Doring? Then I'll come to you, Mr. Chateau.
No, I'm more comfortable with recreational activities that are outside than inside. I think that we need to give some thought as we move into the hotter weather about our cooling systems. And somebody needs to focus in on the HVAC systems to see whether we can incorporate specialized filters that will help mitigate against the spread of the COVID-19 virus, if they exist and if they are within reason price-wise. I think it's worth the extra expense. If people need to be cool and the city's taking on that obligation to provide that infrastructure, then we should make sure it's as safe as it can be.
Ms. Chateau?
I just had one question. If you've heard of anything from other libraries thinking about doing something different with the outside space and having people be able to safely sit apart from each other, a few people, and still get that social element, or even the cooling that we're talking about. Have there been any different ideas talked about?
No, not that I've heard of yet. I'm sure it's going to start. I think libraries everywhere are just getting used to this new model of doing curbside and starting that out for the public.
Thank you.
Mr. Knudsen, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I just wonder if, enforcing mask requirements for residents. I know that on a hot summer afternoon, whenever I'm in the library, I always see lots of people using that cool space and plenty of people that don't have internet at home using the computers. And I just wonder if we're appropriately masked, if we can allow those residents to be in our library. I'd like to see it. I think it's a real community resource, and if we could get some guidance from the county health department around that. We've got a big library compared to the city of Napa, compared to Yountville, compared to Calistoga, and I think we have appropriate staff. It'd be nice to be able to socially distanced, of course, appropriately open it if possible.
Thank you. And I think that the conversation in terms of cooling centers can extend beyond just the library. I think it's, part of these county briefings. This can be a subject where we discuss how the county, the Department of Health and the county might be able to help participate in whatever cooling programs we come up with. So I think it's a very, as we know, with this week, things heating up, it's very timely discussion. So I think having everybody thinking about it will be important. So with that, if there's no more comment on this issue, Mr. Presswich, is there more on this item?
So we'll follow up on specifically the face mask requirements with the county public health office to explore that, because I think at the moment the shelter order requires face masks inside a business if there's an inability to be within 6 feet. Inability to maintain a 6 foot distance. So that's a follow-up item. And I do believe there are some specialized filters, and we'll need to look into that as well. So our interest tonight is making sure that the council feels comfortable with a planned curbside type of start up beginning next Monday. And I'm not hearing that doesn't work for you. So I'm going to interpret that as consent that we will continue to plan for a Monday reopening. That means there'll be some staff inside the building beginning to get it prepared for that process. There's some more process to work out, but thank you for your feedback on that tonight. That's very helpful.
Thank you. And thank you to the library staff for your focus on this. It's very much appreciated by the community. So thank you.
Thank you. My staff is going to be very happy to be back in the library.
Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, so we'll move on from this item and we will move on to item 10.2. And this is discussion and direction regarding St. Helena business recovery support, business recovery coordination, regulatory flexibility, and business assistance. And this is Mr. Presswich.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have a couple of items that we wanted to discuss with you tonight. And I wanted to begin with a focus on business recovery coordination, because as you know, your partnership with the city of Calistoga and the town of Yountville will result in a marketing campaign that begins in the next month or two and will transition through the fall. And that campaign starts with really locals first. So the visitors in downtown St. Helena today, our hope is that they are primarily Napa County visitors that are just people living in the county and looking for essential goods within the county, etc. But we know that with the effort, it's going to require us to think a little differently, perhaps find ways to develop programming that maintains the physical distancing expectations of the state and the county, but also adds a little vitality for our businesses as we begin to recover from the pandemic. We also know that this is the same time of year that we were already planning to prepare the downtown in particular for, and all businesses really in St. Helena, for the downtown streetscape sidewalk replacement project. Trees are planned to come out the second week of January, and we anticipate beginning that project in approximately March, rain and weather permitting. So, and that project is followed by a PG&E gas main project that will run part of down to Madrona, jog over to Oak, and come back at the bridge at Mitchell. So there's a lot of activity that's occurring in the downtown and with businesses in particular over the next 12 months. And I know that it's a job that it's going to require a lot of focus and enhanced communication for the city. So just as we've ramped up with respect to the EOC structure to augment our communications services and communication activities with a three-person team, maybe 4-person team. Cindy can nod at me if it's 4 or 3. I think She hasn't held up her fingers yet, so it's 3 or 4. But we've augmented our communications team, and we have also augmented our planning section staff to take on the transition to the virtual meeting environment, to plan for what's coming next, the reopening protocols, all of the work that's gone into that, and we've amplified that planning effort. The same thing I'm anticipating is needed on the business recovery side. So I'm anticipating asking a staff member from our Parks Department to serve as a lead in that and to borrow some of her time. This is Stephanie Yakabachi, to borrow some of her time to manage a enhanced business recovery communication forum, if you will. We had a meeting last Friday in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, where a number of businesses participated on a Zoom meeting. And we provided an opportunity for us to answer a number of questions about the changing COVID public health orders, and also just clarify questions that they had, and to provide them information and direct them to resources. So we anticipate continuing that forum over the coming weeks and probably into months. This is a standing Zoom meeting that will occur on Fridays. And so that's an example of the city investing in enhanced communication with our business community. And I'm anticipating borrowing some time from at least at the beginning 2 additional staff members, so that we have a team of 3 prepared to augment communications in partnership with the Director of Public Works, the city engineer on the streetscape project, in partnership and in communication with our city planner on any legislative type efforts that are needed with respect to use permits and activities. And then also in coordination with the city manager to ensure that when appropriate, there are additional considerations and communications that may require council, communications and enhanced communications, so that we provide you an early look at developing plans. So that is a sketch of what we're looking at. I'm anticipating it would be somewhere between 20 and 50% of someone's time. I anticipate this is something that we would want to support for about a year. Doesn't really change jobs. They would still be working in their core departments, but taking on a special project on top of that to amplify messaging. So I'll pause there before we move into a discussion on regulatory flexibility, in case you have any questions about an effort to enhance our business recovery communications.
I'll look for any comment or question from the council at this point. Ms. Goberstein?
Concerned about the number of sources of information that are out there. People are getting flooded with information from, whether it's from, and I'm not picking on anybody, but everybody. Our legislators are sending out information, and then it comes out in the form of email to all of us, and then it appears on Nextdoor, or it gets reposted on Nextdoor by somebody. And I support this effort, but I think it has to be seen as the place to go. Like, you want to know what the rule is in St. Helena or what's happening next, because there's just so much noise out there. I don't know how these businesses can navigate their way through it. So that's my only concern about it. We need like one voice coming out of the city. Here's what's happening.
Those are really good comments, because, for example, at the meeting on Friday, the businesses are required today to post 2 documents on their door in order to reopen successfully. And those 2 documents are found in business FAQs produced by the county, and you have to find direct links. One takes you to an appendix on a county document, and the second takes you to the state website to find your type of business, which you then fill out the form and you print and post those on the exterior of your building. It's very difficult. And if we're just sending an email, that requires a business owner to try to figure out how to navigate where to find the information they're looking for. That was the most common question that we had on Friday. And I think by enhancing our efforts at communication, we can simplify ways that we communicate. I think we're in a very dynamic phase right now where the guidance is coming from the state and the county, and we're in a process of helping our businesses understand and navigate that. And we're very fortunate to have a PIO team that is actively on top of it. But I think it's still, the Zoom meeting revealed the fact that it's still very difficult to find information. And I looked for something that I knew was on that business FAQ. It's a 5-page document. And the link I was looking for, which was a guidance document, was on page 2, slightly above the links that I just described. And it took me about 10 minutes to find a link that I looked at just about 2 hours earlier. It's a lot of information to navigate. And I think that we can add a lot of value to simplifying that. And this is also intended to be very creative. So we're going to be looking to our business partners for ideas on how we can cultivate dwell space and enhance programming. And I know already there's some really exciting ideas about a drive-in theater that we're going to share with you in the coming days as those ideas mature. And I'm thrilled with the innovation. I think we're all going to enjoy some of the innovation that comes out of this. But I think you're right, Councilmember Coberstein. We can't over communicate enough, and to the extent we can simplify some of that messaging, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a matter of simplifying, but just giving them the answer, not sending them to the next link and the next link, and here's all your resources, boil it down and here's what you got to do. It would be much more helpful, I think.
So with that, are we ready to move to the regulatory flexibility item unless there's other Ms. Chateau?
I was just going to say that I'm so grateful that we're doing this. Thank you. The situation's so serious for all of our businesses. And I think it's going to be super helpful to have something happening regular and that you can go to ask questions and get answers back or think of ideas together and create some of that synergy and teamwork, trying to tackle these problems that are so huge all together. So thank you. I'm excited about the idea and just so grateful we're doing something like this and that we're going to invest in staff time in a new way.
Yeah, so we can put forward some dynamic support for the businesses and work with them. Mr. Knudsen?
I just also want to give a shout out to the landlords that have given some rent forgiveness to some of the businesses. I think that's super appreciated and helpful. I also want to give a shout out to those businesses that were allowed to stay open that did in fact stay open, because they were able to create a sense of community when things were very bleak in town, and that was much appreciated.
Thank you. So with that, unless there's no additional comment, we'll move back to Mr. Prestwich and we'll move on to item 2. And then after the 3 items, I'll open it up for public comment. So this is the regulatory flexibility aspect.
So a second common question that we discussed on Friday with the businesses was a question regarding whether there was an interest on the part of either restaurants or retail spaces for use of city right-of-way. And then secondly, and the idea there is if there are physical distancing requirements that are limiting the number of patrons inside the business, is there an interest or an opportunity to expand beyond the walls of the building into the front of the building or perhaps behind the building? So it also raises a question about whether a parking lot or parking spaces could be repurposed for other use for a specific business. We also talked a little bit about parklets, which is a component within our economic strategy that we parked for a later day, and maybe that day is coming sooner than later. But the idea of a parklet is to use a parking space adjacent to a restaurant or a business, and to create space for the business to move into. And there's many different ways of executing a program like that, but that's something that's sort of in the same space. So we believe that the city's temporary use permit process is a nice way of working with our businesses, particularly from the right-of-way standpoint. and we would recommend that the city waive fees for any temporary use permits associated with that space or use of a space, so long as it met ADA requirements. It would be only in place during the emergency, and as you know, our temporary use permits allow for up to 12 months. So that's a nice timeline. It seems to fit this emergency very nicely. A second question relates to whether businesses would be interested in using parking spaces. And we invited businesses on Friday that participated to let us know and to contact our planning director to let us know if they had an interest in something like that. And we did receive at least one, and I'll invite our planning director in a moment to provide you some additional details. But there is at least one that has an interest in expanding into some parking spaces. And our city attorney and our planning director and I have had some conversations about whether that's something that could be accomplished via the temporary use permit or whether some form of legislation would be more appropriate. And I'll stop there and ask both our planning director and our city attorney to add a little more context to the parking space conversation.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. And hello, Council and Mayor. I am just here to give you a little bit more background related to the business that's interested in utilizing some private parking space that they actually own and control that space as the Cliff Family Winery. And I'm actually going to be meeting with Lizzie Gay tomorrow afternoon to take a look at what their needs are. They may have some other plans in the works as well, but I did want to take a look at that and hear more about what their spacing needs are. And also, this is also just for this interim period that we're dealing with. We've got COVID happening, and then if they want to continue the temporary use permit, like the city manager mentioned, they can continue that for up to 12 months. One thing that the city attorney and I do need to clarify is, I believe it's section 17136040 of the code expressly notes that private parking spaces are not to be used for storage or dining or other types of things. So that we have to get clarity on whether we have to come back to council with a code amendment to relax that, or can we do that under the general, there's a general statement in the temporary use permit ordinance that allows the planning director to make an interpretation on uses that are compatible with the district and the surrounding uses. So as we know, we already have outdoor dining tables and sometimes sidewalk displays in our downtown. So I would say that it's not an incompatible use, but one thing that we always want to make a notation of is that, the ADA accessibility, especially where it's in the right of way. So I think, we're in a good position compared to like Yountville and Calistoga that didn't go ahead and put temporary use permits in order and have very rigid codes. And so I think at this point, I think the city manager and I definitely want to work and expedite helping businesses relocate some of their operations outside as they need to, but just, also have an eye to make sure that we have some wiggle room and flexibility in the code.
Thank you. And Ms. Udea, do you have a comment on this?
I think Maya's right that we do need to spend a little bit more time talking through some of the different options. What I've been thinking about is asking the council to consider adopting a temporary uncodified zoning ordinance that would essentially waive a number of the requirements that are currently impediments to businesses expanding into outdoor areas, related not only to parking spaces, but also to things like the outdoor display of merchandise or other expansions of outdoor uses. And I think it would also be a good idea, if the council is interested in going in this direction, to have the council take some formal action to waive all applicable fees and permits for this type of activity, primarily any temporary use permits as well as any encroachment permits, or perhaps a special application could be developed for expanded uses, and the fee could be waived for that as well.
Thank you. And I know that Yountville and Calistoga are talking about similar measures. Are we discussing with them sort of the specifics of what they're doing to compare to what we're doing in terms of consistency? Has there been any dialogue with those two cities?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have been in contact with both the planning directors from Calistoga and Yountville. What essentially their programs, Yountville went and clear, they made basically they called out 3 different specific uses, wine tasting, retail, and restaurants. There's a lot of similarity in the requirements that need to be met. There's a business support exemption form, if you will. It's a 1-page form that they fill out. They attach a little floor plan that shows, hey, this is where I want to locate my my tables, if it's tables outside. If it's merchandise, for the other application, they basically need to show that they're meeting the ADA requirements and that they're certifying that they're going to be responsible for maintaining that. So it's just signed by the planning department. Of course, no fee. So I think I think what's different about their situation than ours is very early on, they started getting a lot of inquiries from their business community saying, wow, we don't have enough space. We got to get out on the sidewalk. We need to use our parking spaces. And they were not equipped to deal with that because they had some very strict regulations in their code. And so they decided to move forward. And I'm not sure if it's actually been, if the resolution has actually gone to their communities yet, but I think it will be going very shortly. So they wanted to just have a very simple approach to letting things be streamlined because they didn't even have any flexibility via temporary CUP such as that we have. So like I said, we're still discussing this with the city attorney about what's going to give us, obviously the correct legal path to do it, but with the goal that we want to absolutely streamline this and make it easy and not costly at all. The current timeframe to process a temporary CUP, just pre-COVID, is about a week, and it's not a very extensive application. It's basically a project description and a site plan. And if there's a lot of new changes happening on the inside of the building, we may request a floor plan. I mean, it's reviewed by Public Works, Building, Planning, and Fire. So we feel, if we can make a concerted effort to continue to make that process work to the extent that we need to, but also at the same time, I want to make sure that we navigate everything we need to on the legal side with the city attorney.
Okay, thank you. And I think Mr. Knudsen has a comment, but I was going to ask in terms of time frame, in terms of where Yountville and Calistoga are, is there a way of looking at this that we would be somewhat consistent when we would be able to come online? So we're all sort of in the same time frame?
I think I'd need to verify with our city attorney depending on which way we move. But I do think, at least right now, between our temporary encroachment permits, people, are familiar with that process, and also just having our temporary CUP process as a mechanism. If we're able to use that, I think we can start doing that right away. So I think I understand the need to want to be consistent, but at the same time, our downtown landscape, I had a chance to go actually spend a lot of time in Yountville and looking at their downtown this weekend. We have they have a very different, as you know, layout of their downtown with a lot of plazas, private spaces. And in our particular downtown, there's not actually a lot of room for most businesses to really utilize the front sidewalk area. and still maintain the ADA compliance. But there are a few opportunity areas for select businesses to utilize their private parking in the rear. So I think for them, they had more, that's probably why they got more interest from their business community to do something, because their layout obviously allowed that flexibility for expansion.
Well, it's appreciated that you went down and looked at that and really understood the situation. So thank you. Mr. Knudsen, did you have a comment?
I just was curious because of sort of it seems like we've sort of got lack of demand. Given sort of social distancing, can we do it? I mean, this isn't like do it now. This could be over time. We could sort of uncover these opportunities, right? Planning director.
Are you? I'm not sure if I quite understand the question. Is it you mean look at this on a case-by-case basis?
We have very few cases, it seems like, so far, right? We've got our interest in this from the business community isn't very high.
That is correct.
But perhaps later, I guess that's my question, but perhaps later in 2 months or 3 months, and as people face the challenges of opening a restaurant, particularly with every other seating or whatever it's going to be, and then folks might say, you know what, it would be really great to be able to spill out or this, that, or the other thing. We're going to be flexible about that, right?
Yes,
so
I'd like to. Thank you.
Councilmember Knudsen, if I could jump in on that also. I think the city staff believes that we have a solution for right-of-way in the front of the buildings, but I think it appears that we may need some legislative action should the council be willing to relax requirements related to use of parking spaces. And so tonight we're really interested in taking your temperature on whether you feel comfortable with that idea on a case-by-case basis, or some form of across the board flexibility during the emergency, that we would work with the city attorney on an approach that we would bring back to you at a relatively near council meeting, so that businesses that were interested in use of a parking space like Cliff Family Winery would be able to have a process available to them that may be different than the traditional route. So we're looking for a bit of temperature, especially on the parking spaces, and we think that we have a solution for the right-of-way side. And I guess the third question is, does the council feel comfortable with the idea of waiving fees associated with these types of temporary use permits?
Any thoughts, Ms. Coverstein, I sing?
I'm in favor of this, and I would like it to be administrative as much as possible. I agree that I think our city attorney and community or development director should be working on it and creating something that's really wide open, because our zoning ordinance has so many pitfalls that if you're not looking in the right place, you think you're operating under the temporary use section, but it says, however, if it's not allowed in the district, you can't do it under this. And so it's almost like you need to just say, forget all that. You can do, anything within reason during this COVID emergency that our staff allows you to do. And I'm certainly in favor of waiving the fees. But I mean, there are so many things you can't do as far as outdoors, and I just don't want it to be more complicated for people. It should be simple and administratively handled. And if there are any particular issues, I'm sure you would get in touch with some of us if you thought there was something really concerning that somebody wanted to do.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Ms. Chateau?
I was just going to say all the same things. I agree with Councilmember Coverstein, definitely waiving the fees. And I think since we have this great example from Cliff Family, we just move forward and we make it as simple as possible, and so that we don't have to spend a lot more time on it, unless there's some concerning issue, City Manager Presswich, that you want to come back to us with.
Okay. Mr. Doring, did you have a comment?
Well, I am concerned about those businesses that don't have these alternative or adjacent spaces that are available for them to be creative in operating their businesses. I think we need to be cognizant of that. So there may be one business that has a huge parking lot that they can use, but there may be a downtown business, a restaurant that's really limited in the front and the back. And I think we just need to make sure that folks don't feel like they're put at an economic disadvantage. We should really be mindful of those businesses that have fewer opportunities and try to be creative in allowing them to maybe use a space that's not even close to where they are potentially, so they can operate outdoors, whether it be a restaurant or some other use. I think that would be my concern, that we want to obviously help those who are coming forward and have ideas, but we don't want to forget about those who are saying, hey, all I have is my indoor space. And now I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage. So I just want to be cognizant of that part.
Could we take away public parking as an option for some of these confined, constrained businesses? Temporarily, of course.
It's an option from a parklet perspective. If you're a small business, let's say on Main Street, and we would have to talk through the program and how it would work. Sometimes cities ask the business to fund that. In other cases, the city funds the construction of some form of a platform, if you will, that extends at grade with the sidewalk into the parking stall and may have plantings in it, ornamental plantings, etc., that extends that space. So we would need to bring you a process for that. And there's also a Caltrans encroachment issue that we would need to resolve. And so but that's another example. And I think that this conversation underscores the importance of the partnership with enhancing the business recovery focus, but also soliciting some good ideas and creative ideas about use of other space, whether it's perhaps closing Hunt periodically in partnership with some type of an event, or creating a space on Money Way or through Money Way from time to time that enhances the opportunity for our businesses to conduct commerce in a safe way and an expanded way. So I think these are examples of ways that we can think creatively about use of our space that adds value to our business community.
I'm certainly Ms. Coberstein?
I just wanted to add to that Money Way discussion. I mean, that was a big item with the steering committee for the sidewalk project, and this might be an excellent pilot project to see if it actually pays off. It would help all of the businesses on that side of the street if they could be using Money Way in some fashion, whether it's a restaurant or somebody else. So if we could make that happen in some way, I think that would help them. On the other side of the street, you know, we've got Railroad or Hunt Avenue, and I think closing off access to some of our public rights of way makes sense if people actually have a demand for it. I think we need to go to them and hear what they really want, and you know, then be flexible enough to try to deliver it.
I could see also, I mean, you could see, for example, Cook or Market or Model Bakery, you could see that if they could have a couple of tables on a parklet temporarily, of course, that, you know, that might, first of all, add to the atmosphere that St. Helena is open, and might be really helpful to those specific businesses given social distancing. But, you know, I'm open to it, but you know, it depends, I guess, on safety and some other things.
Well, I'm very supportive of these ideas and comments, and I think that the idea of keeping it as administrative as possible, eliminating the fees, allowing creativity. I'm certainly hearing from some businesses that are interested in this type of thing. So I think moving forward with this would be excellent. And the looking at Money Way, looking at Railroad Avenue, and sort of starting to see what are the possibilities, and then knowing that our planning director and our city attorney are working together, I think allows us to feel that we can, as a council, allow an administrative approach when folks come forward. So those are my thoughts. Anything else from the council on this issue before we move to the business assistance? Do you feel you have direction, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
So the third of three items here, also the final item is business assistance. And Vice Mayor Dorian at our budget workshop on the 14th raised a question of potential help for our business community. He arranged for us to email you a summary of a Healdsburg program that provides loans to Healdsburg businesses. We're also aware that the city of Roseville, California, has also provided a similar type of program. And we itemize this for discussion tonight because as we begin to further build our budget, and our second workshop is coming up in less than 48 hours, it will be necessary for us to understand if there's council interest in a program such as this, so that we can bring you, if a program like this moves forward, some form of a program of assistance for businesses, we would generally want to be able to provide that fairly quickly to you, and it may have some form of a budget impact. So we don't have a recommendation for you tonight. We're looking for your level of interest in some form of a program like this. And as you know, earlier on tonight's agenda, we've spotted a program through the CDBG program that will potentially deliver an over-the-counter opportunity for us. You've raised some questions that we'll follow up on and try to learn whether that can be deployed quickly. And to the extent we can provide you an update on Thursday for that program, we will. But I'll pause there and ask for council feedback on any feedback that you've received from businesses, overtures, interest on some form of business assistance.
Thank you. Are there any initial comments or questions from council? Ms. Goberstein?
Yeah, I did receive some feedback on this, and the message I got was it's desperately needed, and we can't wait too long to put it in place. If we're talking about something that's going to take us 2.5 or 3 months to develop, it may be too late for some of these businesses. So I'd appreciate a good look at what Healdsburg and Roseville did, and can we borrow it and put it in place here? And then we'd have to look at the budget and see where's the money coming from. But the message I got was if you wait too long, it's not going to be helpful. It'll be too late. And numbers that I was given were, up to maybe $20,000 a business or something to be helping with rent, insurance, some of the fixed costs that are just continuing and could make the difference. So I strongly support that we do this. If we get the other grant, if we can pay ourselves back with the grant, that would be wonderful. And that's something I suppose you'll find out. So I support it.
Additional council comment? Mr. Knudsen?
So I want to be supportive of our business community. I want to also be supportive of the folks that are doing food banks and sort of other assistance for people that need to eat. I'm also really nervous to cut into our reserve below a third. I think we have to be able to operate 3 to 4 months out. And my questions about this potential program sort of are about, do we only loan to certain businesses that that they also have some certain financial conditions? Do we also attach it to individuals so that we are sort of guaranteed repayment? Do we require them to pay only for salaries, for example? It seems like there's some questions that I want to, since it's public money, I think we need to think about what the program would look like.
Ms. Chateau, any comment?
Just the same, I have more questions than I think that we can get tonight with just this direction. I was hoping when I saw the grant earlier that would be a way that we could not have to dig deeper into our reserves and with the budget. I just don't understand how we're going to get the money or what else we're going to have to give up because of it. So that's where I'm at.
Mr. Doring? Mr. Vice Mayor?
This is a tough issue. I recognize the financial implications, but I see it differently. I see stimulating these businesses as a way of beefing up our reserve over a longer period of time. So there'll be short-term pain, but if we lose businesses, they won't be there to contribute to sales tax and to, or frankly, property tax may even go down, who knows, slightly. But so I'm looking at businesses that are on the verge of failing. Really, I'm wishful and hopeful that the Chamber of Commerce will be able to tell us what the need is. So we make the money available. There may not be that many businesses that take, say, no, I'm fine. But there may be a few that are right on the verge that can use that. And they're thinking to themselves, maybe it's time for me to retire. I'll let someone else take this over or whatever. Maybe you just force that decision if they're not doing well, or you can sort of maybe save those businesses. I agree that we're struggling on the budget side, and I don't know where that money will come from. And maybe we have to reduce our expectations. But what if we save 5 businesses? That would be really, really good to do. And I agree, it should be focused on basically payroll and rent, those kinds of things. And yes, there's a risk of non-payment back. I think that risk is relatively low. I don't think anyone wants to be on the list of I got $20,000 and I didn't pay the city back, 2 years later or whatever. I think that would be not really good business strategy for that individual. I'm very supportive of it, but I really need to get we need to get our chamber on board and advocate for it and do their own internal polling and surveying. So it's not the city doing that and say, here's what the need is. I do in my heart of hearts believe that there is a legitimate need. And I agree that we can't wait. We can't wait for a couple months. We have to be nimble and do it now. I think so. Yes, we're right in the middle of budget season, so there are going to be some folks who are not going to get as much, and some folks who are going to get more. We have to prioritize keeping business alive because businesses that are alive are contributing back to our reserves.
Thank you. Ms. Koberstein. Well, I think we need the mute.
I'm wondering if you could use the Friday meetings as an opportunity to ask people to contact you personally and let you know, if we had a form of assistance, what would be the best thing for them. I'm a little concerned about the time it would take for the chamber to reach out to members and get back to us. And not everybody's a member of the chamber. And I think to use your recovery coordination idea that we talked about in the very beginning, that float the idea that the city is thinking about this, and would it be helpful, and maybe allow people to communicate with you privately about what would work in their situation.
Thank you. So I too am supportive of, I just want to make a few comments, Mr. Knudsen, and I'll come right back to you. I'm supportive of looking into what this looks like. I think looking at Healdsburg and Roseville that have some models. I think Mr. Knudsen brings up some important points about how things are structured. But I do think the point that if help is needed is needed now, and waiting is not helpful. So it's something that I would want to have looked at as soon as we can to see if we can do something like this, and then where that funding would come from. I think working with the business recovery coordination can make us fast moving and assess where the need is. If folks are on the edge, I want to make sure we're helpful as soon as we can be. I agree, keeping people in business keeps us in business and helps us. So I'm supportive of looking at this quickly and seeing what is available. Mr. Knudsen?
Yeah, I'd just like to add back to my earlier thought that it'd be great for us also through this vehicle, if we end up doing something like this, to support the nonprofits that are feeding residents in our town. I'm very concerned about hunger in our town, and I know that there's several nonprofits that are focused on helping them, and perhaps we also could provide some grants or to the folks that are literally desperate as part of this program.
Thank you. Is there any other? Mr. Prestwich? Yes.
If it's helpful, I know that our Upstart Business Recovery Coordination effort already has plans for a survey that's under development now. We can add some questions to that. And then secondly, our finance director has an opportunity to screen share a summary of both the Healdsburg program and the Roseville program tonight, and can share with you some elements of that in case it provides you, it might help you provide some feedback for us as we develop questions that might be the right questions to ask these businesses. So if that's of interest, April is ready to share her screen if you'd like.
I think that sounds fine. Is there consensus on that? Okay, very good. Yes, please.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? Am I getting thumbs up for seeing the screen?
Yes, we can.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
How's that? Better? Okay, so I looked at the two programs with Healdsburg and Roseville. I actually talked to the finance director, admin services director for Healdsburg, and I have not had a chance to actually physically reach out and talk to Roseville. So just so you can get an idea, there's definitely a varying amount of their general fund budget, so I wanted to at least give a comparison. Healdsburg has a $15 million general fund, and Roseville has $158 million. The funding that was available through Healdsburg was $600,000. And the funding for Roseville was $1 million. And just so you know, all of that money has actually been designated, and Healdsburg is going to be cutting checks this week. That's their hope. And then Roseville, they started their program a lot earlier. They first released it in late March, right after COVID-19, and they made their total allocation, I believe it was by about the second week in April. And for both of these programs, there was an overabundance of amount of money available compared to how many people actually applied to the program. So not everybody actually received the funding. And I know Roseville was on a first come, first serve basis as well. Healdsburg, the maximum was $15,000, and Roseville, it was $20,000. The repayment terms for Healdsburg is 3 to 5 years, depending on the dollar amount. So if a loan was under $5,000, they have 3 years to pay it back. If it was over $5,000, between 5 and 15, they have 5 years to pay it back. Roseville has a 3-year payback term. First payment for Healdsburg is due on May 1st, 2021, and the first payment for Roseville is in January 2021. For Healdsburg, there was no guarantee to the loan, and Roseville, it does not appear that they had a guarantee, although I could not find anything specifically in writing. And I did not capture this on this particular screenshot that I have, but most of the qualifications are pretty standardized. It has to be a small business, under 25 employees. Both of them did require that they show balance sheets, provide balance sheets, so they show that they are demonstrating economic hardship. And there's some other parameters in there, but it was pretty consistent with both of the programs. And then the funding sources for both of these was a little bit different. For Healdsburg, they were utilizing proceeds from Measure V, which is a half-cent sales tax, which does expire in fiscal year 2023. Measure V is a general revenue tax. However, each year the city does conduct a survey of its residents to determine how the revenue should be apportioned according to the city council's priorities. So the typical and the consistent priorities have been street maintenance and repair, public safety, actually to fund 4 police officer positions, maintenance of city facilities, and economic development. So those were their specific areas where they have traditionally allocated Measure V funds. So for this particular instance where they reallocated $600,000, what they did is council made the determination to take $600,000 away from the streets and maintenance repair and then allocate it directly towards this economic development for the small businesses. For for Roseville, a little bit different. They actually have a dedicated citizens benefit fund that was created in 1993 from the proceeds of the city's sale of the hospital property. So it was not, in that case, it's definitely not general fund money. Healdsburg, it is general fund money. However, what they did is they took money designated for projects to reallocate it towards the small businesses. So that's the preliminary information that I was able to find out. So at least that gives you some idea of how much is actually being allocated from each of those particular cities, where the funds are coming from. And then when I talked to Healdsburg, because there is not a guarantee on it, she had mentioned that if anybody defaults on their loans, they'll cross that bridge, when the time comes, and it could potentially just be that they write off the loan and don't ever recover the funding from it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on the information that I was able to gather. Referring back to the CDBG program, that is something that when we talk to the representative in Ukiah, we are going to be looking at getting a couple sample programs to see what other cities have done with economic development recovery and doing the small business loans. And we're hoping to be able to meld it together and kind of form some type of good program, whether if it's council direction that they want to look at allocating some city resources or the CDBG, at least we'll have the basis for that particular program. And staff is currently working on that right now.
Thank you. Any comments from council, Ms. Chateau?
Ms. Smits, did I hear you correctly that you said the trade-off from Healdsburg for the funding was they took money from, instead of improving roads, they used it for this grant?
That is correct. So they actually took funding that was going to be allocated in next year's budget for road repair, took the $600,000 away from that particular program to put it in the small business program. And they were able to do that in their instance because it's general fund monies. With any road repair that we do, it's typically out of gas tax Measure T or the MOE. So we do not have that availability to be able to reallocate those funds.
Thank you.
So in our budget conversations coming up on Thursday, is this an opportunity to look at where some funding for something like this might come from?
It can certainly be part of.
Discuss it. I'm sorry to jump in. We should discuss it on Thursday. I would advocate, I hope we can discuss it.
Mr. Prestwich, did you have a?
Yes, and Mayor, we will be able to add it to our conversation on Thursday. Our focus is going to be the nonprofit funding, the water and wastewater funds, a lot of detail there, and then an update on our general fund. And this can be added to the general fund conversation.
Okay.
And we can also, I think that my takeaway is that the council is comfortable with us surveying the business need. In fact, it's an expectation. We will work on soliciting some feedback on level of interest, et cetera, and be prepared to have a more informed conversation in the coming days.
Are there any other council comments before I open it for public comment? Seeing none, I will open it for public comment on this issue. Are we seeing any?
At this time, we do not have any public comment.
Okay, very good. I will close the public comment. I'll bring it back to council. Are there any further comments or questions by council And if not, does city staff, does city manager feel we have given direction?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody, for your focus on this issue. We will now move to new business item 11.1. This is discussion and direction regarding short-term rental permit renewal fees. And this is April Mitz, our finance director.
Great, thank you. So the current St. Helena Municipal Code established a permitting process for short-term rental of single-family dwellings, otherwise known as the STR and STR permits. So the permit is processed through the planning department when they receive the initial permit, and then it must be renewed every 2 years. The current fee for new permits and renewals is $2,250, and that fee is based on the work that planning staff does have to go through in verifying that they either meet the requirements to receive the initial permit, or when the permit is getting renewed, they are actually following the requirements of the permit. So the STR permits renewals are based on the month that they're issued. So therefore, the renewal periods will stagger throughout the year. It's unlike the business licenses where everything renews on January 1st. So for this current fiscal year, there's 12 permits up for renewal. Out of the 12, 3 of them were completed prior to May 2020, and the remaining 9 are due by May 31st. Of the 9 that are remaining, 5 of them have already submitted and paid. So recently, staff was asked by a current permit holder who does have to renew by May 31st that if there's any ability to defer or reduce the payment for the renewal until a time where STRs are able to accept guests. Due to the continued effects of COVID-19, including the inability of STRs to conduct business since March of 2020, staff is seeking City Council direction regarding the collection of STR permit fee renewals to see if there's any interest in actually deferring the payments for any of the remaining permit holders who have not paid.
Thank you. Are there any initial comments, questions from council? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to public comment. I'll see if there's anything, anybody at public comment.
This time we do not have any public comment.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the council. I had a few thoughts on this. You know, well, we recognize this COVID-19 situation has hit everybody very, very hard. And we've done certain things in terms of giving relief to some of the entities we work with in the hospitality industry. My concern with deferring a payment on the STR is that there's a line of other folks who would want to have one of these. And if I were a permit holder, I think it would be in the best interest of a permit holder to make sure that they keep their permit. And so if there's a way to think about how to structure something that offered relief in a different way, perhaps, but I'd just be wary or concerned with opening up the door on the permitting process. I just think it may create some gray area that might create some vulnerabilities for some folks. Those are just some initial thoughts. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in. Ms. Koberstein? Oh, we have the mute.
I'm looking for some clarification. People who submitted and paid, they still can't operate, correct? Because of the COVID situation.
That is correct.
It seems to me like the most equitable thing to do is to sort of toll the time for these people to apply. There's what, 4 of them up in the air right now? And do the same for the people who have paid. I mean, if you paid money in the beginning of May thinking you were going to be able to operate your short-term rental and you're not, it seems to me that instead of getting 12 months for your $2,250, you should get like 14. We should change the renewal date of these permits so that they coincide with when they can actually go back in business. And that way, to me, the people who have already paid would not be harmed by having lost a couple months worth of operation that they paid for. And the others could, maybe we open it up in 2 months or whenever they can actually go back into business.
Ms. Chateau?
When I was reading this, I would be okay with deferring, but not actually wiping out the payment. Because if I understand correctly, that's what we did with the hotels, with the TOT. We deferred, correct, April, that we just deferred the payment. It wasn't like we said that you don't have to pay this. So I would want to do
That is
the same thing. I want to do the same thing, just defer.
Any other comment, council comment?
I think that's fine. I think that the people who have paid should get more months for their payment so that everything is more or less equal among this group who's in the same renewal situation.
Mr. Doring, did you have a thought?
Well, I'm inclined to agree with the analysis laid out by the mayor that there are a lot of other businesses who have been out who are going to come to the door. And I don't think that, business taxes, business fees is going to be just a never ending group of folks. I don't think we want to go down that path. I am amenable to deferring for, 90 days or 120 days. I think that's appropriate. Give people, especially if they're not being able to use it, but not to wipe it out. I would be hesitant to do that. So I'm inclined to be aligned with what the mayor has said in terms of the precedent that we would set for others coming forward and asking for something. It would be never ending.
Mr. Knudsen, did you have a?
I don't know if I have anything unique to say, but I agree with with the vice mayor and with the mayor and with actually all the comments that have been said so far. A possible deferral, but not. I mean, it really would never end. And then we'll get people's property tax, and we'll get this, and we'll get that, and yikes.
Is the proposition put forward by Ms. Koberstein in terms of using time as a way to equalize? Mr. Presswich, do you have any thoughts on an ability to do that, or how that might be done?
This is really a policy question for the council. So it's certainly, I think I'm hearing two options, right? One is a deferral of some particular amount of time, and the other is the concept of tolling, so that there are both, people that have paid and people that have yet to pay will have some ability to have the 2-year period of time. This is a 2-year permit, so they would each have 24 months of activity. So I think we're down to either or at this point, and we'll take direction and implement the direction provided.
So finding, Mr. Doring, do I see a?
Well, I was going to make a motion to have a deferral of the payment for 120 days, but not a waiver of the payment.
I would second that.
I just want to ask a question, and that we feel still gives the protection for the current holder that it's a deferral, not waiving, and so there's no challenge on their permit. We're just creating a deferral. I just want to clarify that. So with that, we have a motion and a second. So if we have a roll call.
Further discussion from the city manager, just to make sure.
Well, I think I would look to the city attorney. I think the mayor raised a legal issue that the city attorney may want to comment on regarding the businesses that have already paid versus those that would be subject to a deferral option.
Well, I suppose what you could do is, so if you defer for 120 days, those who haven't paid, you could, I suppose, do one of two different things. You could do something similar to the idea that Councilmember Koberstein advanced, which is to essentially extend their time period that were however many months, probably the equivalent, 120 days. Or I suppose you could do something to the effect of trying to, well, I suppose that would probably be a way to equalize it.
And I would be happy to amend my motion to allow those who have paid the opportunity to get their money back for that 4-month period, if that helps equalize those who have already paid in advance. I don't think there are going to be that many takers, but we should maybe make that. I mean, I can make that part of my motion.
Ms. Koberstein, does that satisfy?
Complicated.
Ms. Koberstein, does that satisfy what your concern was in terms of equitability?
Well, I don't know if it creates more. It does address the equitability, but it sort of creates more problem. Now you give people money back, and then what are they going to do? Come back and reapply when the COVID thing is over? I would rather extend the time on the permit for the people who have applied to be equal to the 120 days that we're giving other people, or sooner if they're able to actually be back in business legally, so that they get more than 2 years. They might get 2 years, 2 months on their permit before they have to renew again, rather than give them their money back.
I'll stay with my motion.
Ms. Chateau, did you have Ms. Chateau, did you, no?
I was just curious, in that case, it sounds to me like we're then giving them the 3 months. It's not just deferring it because you're by extending the time. So that's the part that's not making sense to me.
I don't think the motion was to, if the motion is to never collect it, then I'm going to remove my second.
No, that's not the motion. It's simply a deferral of 120 days.
Yeah, so just to defer the,
and upon further consideration, I'm not really willing to make accommodations for folks who've already paid. No.
So there we are. We have a motion. I second that is still there. So if we have a roll call.
Mr. Mayor, did you ask for public comment?
I did, and nobody commented.
Okay.
Our discussion sort of happened after the public comment, but I did open it for public comment. Are there any other concerns on this or thoughts? And if not, I will ask for the roll call.
Vice Mayor Dory?
Yes.
Councilor Knudsen?
yes.
Koberstein?
No.
Chateau?
Yes.
And Mayor Eldredge?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move to our final item. This is item 11.2. This is discussion and direction to staff regarding wastewater winter average billing adjustments for residential customers for the January-February bi-monthly billing cycle. And this is April Mitz, our finance director.
Great. Thank you. Can I get one clarification on the previous item? So the motion and approval was to defer for 120 days, and there was not the amendment to offer a refund for those who already paid, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. So the next item on the agenda tonight is the wastewater winter average billing. And this was something that I had brought up to City Council and mentioned it at the May 14th City Council meeting. So the May 12th City Council meeting, and this is a follow-up item. So we would like discussion and direction to staff regarding wastewater winter average billing adjustments for residential customers for the January-February first bi-monthly billing cycle. So as you recall, on October 8th, 2019, City Council did adopt an ordinance amending the current St. Helena Municipal Code, changing the utility billing cycle for water and wastewater from monthly to bi-monthly billing. These changes were effective on January 1st, 2020, with the first bi-monthly bill for January and February 2020 issued mid-March 2020. The billing for residential wastewater is based off of the water used in January, February, and March of each year, or what we term as what we call the winter average. So staff prepared the second bi-monthly billing utility invoices that was the invoices that was just received the week before last, we did discover that during the transition to the bi-monthly billing, the city's software system did not charge residential customers correctly for winter average for the first billing cycle. So when customers did receive their January and February 2020 utility statement, which was again invoiced in March, the wastewater should have been charged for 2 months of winter average use, but the actual amount charged was only for 1 month. So residential customers, they are the only customers that are charged based on winter average, and this is the only category that was actually affected. The winter average calculations have been corrected and updated in the city's financial software system, and so the most recent invoices received do reflect the correct amount to be charged from this point going forward for the bi-monthly billing. The billing calculation error did affect a little over 1,300 residential accounts. The average winter average is 5 units per household. So that's looking at in totality winter average for single family residential. It's typically 5 units per household per month, which equates on average to an underbilled amount of $25.85 per individual residential unit. The cumulative effect for 1 month period is $50,000. And I just wanted to provide a point of clarification that although Vineyard Valley is considered residential, this error does not affect the Vineyard Valley residents because their monthly bills have already been set by Vineyard Valley management. So I wanted to let everybody know that because I know that's one of the populations that might inversely be affected by this. Typically what staff would do when an error like this is discovered, we would typically administratively make the adjustments to the affected account or the affected accounts, and the adjustment would go on the next billing statement. However, due to the abnormality of COVID-19 and the financial implications that it might be having on St. Helena residents, staff is seeking City Council direction for the preferred option for reimbursement. There were 2 options presented in the staff report, which I'd like to receive feedback on. So the first option is to make the adjustment to the affected accounts, and this adjustment would show on the next bi-monthly billing cycle, which would be July. So that's the first option. So pay the underbilled amount in totality in 1 payment cycle. And then the other option is to equally spread the additional amount due over 3-month billing periods for each account, which would stretch it out over approximately 6 months, and it would add about $10 per billing cycle onto each of these accounts. So with that information, I am seeking City Council direction on a preferred option.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any initial, I see a wave from Mr. Knudsen.
I'm confused. It's 5 units times $5 a unit is $25, but it's only 1,300 accounts. 25 times 1,300 is like $33,000. Mitz? What am I missing?
It is because of Vineyard Valley and multifamily consumptions, because their consumptions in the totality. So for instance, Vineyard Valley has 2 particular lines that come in. So their 2 lines are only considered 2 of those 1,300 accounts, but those 2 lines together serve 212 residential units. So that's why you see a little bit of a differentiation in between just trying to do the straight math of 1,300 times 25.
So it's a $17,000 difference. So that would mean that the other units that's a big number.
Between Vineyard Valley as well as the other multifamily residential units, and I'm looking to see if I am looking to see if I put the number of units in the staff report for other multifamily. And on average, Vineyard Valley has about 2.5 units per month for their winter average is what their winter average is.
Okay.
Are there any other comments from council? Mr. Doring.
It's probably a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway. Are the bills reviewed, like a sampling of the bills, they're produced, and then does somebody actually go, okay, I'm going to take a look at a sampling of these bills and see if they make sense before they're distributed to our residents?
We do currently take a sampling, and unfortunately, because this is the first bi-monthly billing cycle, it was not caught in the sampling. Since we did discover this error in the billing, what we've done is we've put new protocols in place where we're actually going to have 3 different people check the amounts, as well as is how they are coded in our system. We're going to be updating the coding in our system, so we should be able to recognize this a lot easier than we did in the past.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comment, question at this point? I'm going to open it to public comment. I'm asking if we have anybody in line for public comment.
We do not have any public comment at this time.
Thank you. I'll bring it back. I'll close public comment. I'm looking at the options. I feel like, particularly due to this, current situation, that spreading it out might be helpful to members of the community. That's my thought over this 3 bi-monthly billing periods. Wondering if there's any thought on that from the council.
I agree with that. For these multifamily in Vineyard Valley, it's just going to be passed on to the ultimate homeowner. And so it's going to be realized in this year, no matter when it's collected. It's going to come in a little slower, but I'm in favor of spreading it out.
Any additional, Ms. Chutel?
I am too. I think we should spread it out, option 2.
Okay. Do we have any other council comments? I would if not seeing any, I would entertain a motion on this.
What would be the?
Go ahead, Mr.
You
Doran.
may have talked about this, Ms. Mitz, but what would be the average, roughly, the additional payment over those 6 months? 3 bi-monthly bills. What would be the additional amount on each one of those 3 bills? $20?
It would be based on the average use of 5 units. It would be approximately $10 per bi-monthly billing cycle. However, that will depend on the actual usage per residential unit. But citywide, our average use is 5 units per month.
So, because the bill is based on the winter average, the water usage in the summertime is not going to affect that bill. That bill is already put in place, right? On the wastewater side, it's already set.
That is correct.
Okay. I don't know, just for discussion, I'm wondering if rather than 3 bi-monthly billing periods, we can do 2. So it'd be spread out over 4 months rather than 6.
Are there any other thoughts on that from the council? Mr. Knudsen?
Sure. 2 or 3 to me, sort of immaterial to me, but I want to just sort of actually throw a thank you to the city manager and to the finance director, Ms. Mitz. We all make mistakes, and this is embarrassing, but I appreciate you guys covering it in a forthright manner, because $50,000 is $50,000. So thank you.
So I see Mr. Doring's point that since these are bi-monthly periods, doing 2 makes sense. I would go either way. Is there anybody that has a strong feeling?
No, I just hope we communicate to people what we're doing. Why that this is a one-time charge that's going to appear twice on your bill.
Okay.
Yes, we are planning on utilizing the Shine newsletter, as well as we'll include a billing insert when the bills go out. So we are planning on doing that.
So are we comfortable as a council with the 2 periods as opposed to the 3? Yep. Okay. So I'm looking at my agenda here. So this is just seeking direction. This is not an actual, doesn't need to come to a vote on this. Is that correct? Okay, very good. And do you
That
feel,
is correct.
And you feel you have direction?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, very good. So now we're coming to the end of the meeting. Is there anything else for the good of the group that anybody has to put forward? With that, did I see any? With that, I'm going to close, but I want to say, you know, we're going to see in the end of June or the beginning of June, the end of the school year. And I want to keep thinking about how to commend our young people for the incredible things that we've asked of them over the last few months. I know everybody's worked hard, but for them, this very unique, challenging situation, I just want to keep them, our thoughts on them as they finish the school year and what we can do to help keep them, you know, and foster their strengths and help encourage them in their steps forward in the world. So I want to keep that in mind. Continued thanks to the council, to the staff and the community for the focus through all of this. And with that, we've been St. Helena strong, and let's just keep being that and hanging there together and move forward. So thank you, everybody, and I will adjourn the meeting.